back to Superhuman Customs, everybody. I'm your host, Stephen Human. Today we got something really cool. So this is a Zack Snyder Darkseid from the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League. I was very disappointed that the theatrical version only mentioned him once. I didn't have any pictures of him or video or anything. So I was very happy when I watched the Snyder cut and I saw Darkseid, my favorite Superman villain. What we're gonna do to this guy is we're just gonna spruce him up. That's all. He's already got some good glossiness to him, got some great details, but we're gonna stand out. So we're gonna take some wash, we're gonna darken him up completely, we're gonna dry brush over the top, add some textures, the whole shebang, and hopefully at the end, this guy will look really amazing. So let's jump in. The first stage of Darkseid is gonna be very straightforward because we're just gonna take this Vallejo game wash and we are gonna coat him completely. Every inch of him is going to get coated, and I'm going to leave it on pretty thick because we want to make him nice and dark so that we can start lighting him up after that. And as you guys know, when you start out with the wash, it automatically makes a pretty big difference. And we might even want to go a little bit darker with him. We'll see once we get this first coat on of what it is that we think we need to do with this Darkseid. Now, I'm going to be honest. I love Darkseid. He is my favorite Superman villain. I mean, I love, Lex Luthor, obviously, but when it comes to somebody who can go head to head with Superman and beat him, Darkseid's it, and I love it. So it's why I like Bane so much as well, because Bane is that guy that can beat Batman physically and mentally when he's written correctly. Sometimes he's not. Sometimes they make him out to be stupid, but for the most part, when they're well written, Superman should not be able to beat Darkseid unless he has to give something up. And the same thing with Bane. And so I just love this character. And going through, this is a great version of his character. We didn't see much of him in the movie, obviously, but he seems to be a very classic Darkseid. And I personally just really appreciate that. And so going through on this toy, it's a little bit like, this is a little more nerve-wracking than on some of the ones that I don't care so much about. But obviously, that's going to mean that I'm going to try and do a good job. Where sometimes, let's be honest, I half-ass some things. I'm mature enough to admit that sometimes on these customs, if I don't care about them, I half-ass them a little bit. And we are not going to half-ass Darkseid. No way. Now, one thing you'll notice me doing on some of these pieces of armor is that I'm actually brushing up on them, because how the armor is made, I want to be able to get into the cracks. And in order to do that, I need to brush up into the cracks. So just remember that, especially when you're working on a wash. You want to be able to go up a little bit and get inside those cracks. Because once we start lightening things up, I'm going to go down, and that is going to allow us to just hit the edges and allow this darkness to just stay in there. And with some of these areas, you're going to need to kind of just make sure that you're getting the wash into the cracks. Because if you're going too fast, then it'll just stay on the outer area. And especially with what we're doing here, we want this to get into all of these details. Because lightening it up, we're going to go with the dry brush, and we want to just hit these edges. So you see how we're getting into all those little cracks? That's what we want. The last thing we need to do with the wash, now that these covers, we need to get around these eyes because they need to be darker than everything else. Now I'm going to be very careful not to get the pupil. And so, but they've got to get darkened up. And I'm thinking we'll see, I might put some glow-in-the-dark paint for the pupil. That's worked out pretty well with like Lex Luthor and some of these other guys, but he's looking pretty dang good. We're going to use my standard blue here for the metallic, and we're just going to go over the top, nice and light. And we're going to move it. See how it lightens it up quite a bit right off the bat. But I'm actually used a little bit too much on that first one. So I'm going to move it around. And I'm going to use that for the rest. You can see how it's starting to hit the areas, hit the edges that I wanted to hit.
And so I'm just going to go through all the armor like this and use a little bit less that first time. Got too much on there. And if you make a mistake like that, I mean, you guys have seen me do it plenty of times. Just, you can go through a little bit more wash in those areas if it doesn't match. But it's looking pretty dang good. That's the great thing about this metallic paint, this craft stuff that's pretty cheap, is that it moves around pretty nicely. So just move it around. And when you get the right amount on the brush, it just goes on really nicely. And so just a little. Like I said before, I put on too much on that first one. Wasn't really paying attention. So look at that. See, that's doing exactly what we want. If you see up here, you can see it on that first one, it got a little bit into some of these cracks, which I did not want. And on this side, it's looking better. So again, don't beat yourself up too much when you make those mistakes. All of this is fixable. Everything on here, whenever you screw up, it's paint and you can fix it. So don't freak out. Nothing is a lost cause. And sometimes these little mistakes will lead to, some type of finish that you didn't expect that ends up being really cool. Once you get moving on this guy, it actually starts to move pretty fast on this section. Now, obviously, we're going to go through and we're going to add some highlights once we're done with this, but, it is not a super long process to get this because you're just going over and hitting these edges, and you're really seeing how under there it's still dark, which has given us this really nice, realistic look, because that's where dirt and grime and dust and everything would settle. Everything else would be touched or hit, wiped away just naturally. And it would be these little edges where things would stay. Now, doing the head, we need a smaller brush, and we need to go even lighter with the paint, because we don't want to hit the skin. And we have much less area to kind of go. We're using a massive brush on the rest of the body. But on the face here, you just want to go nice and light. And we'll probably take a few more layers to make a big difference, like with the rest of the body. But that's what you want, because you don't want to screw things up at this point, because the body's looking really nice. We just want that head to match. So go slow. Just funny hearing me say it, because I always end up going so fast and then screwing things up. But I'm learning. I've been watching old videos of mine, and I've seen how I've improved. And I've also seen that when I care about a figure, I take more time. And so I need to start taking more time with all of them. And I appreciate when you guys point stuff out where I've either screwed up or where I could improve, because it is like a challenge to me. And I go, oh, well, I can do better. And then I do better. It takes me a little bit of time, but I figured it out eventually. There we go, not bad. Not bad at all. Now that we've got the bases covered, we're going to go through and I'm going to hit some of these edges lightly with a little bit more paint, just like we did with the Lex Luthor. And that ended up turning out so nicely. So we're just going to hit some of these edges. And all that's going to do is make things stand out a little bit more. That's what we want. We want things to stand out. We want that contrast in the figure. And it's not going to come, if it was real life, it would come naturally. But in this circumstance, obviously, it's not going to come naturally. We need to add it. And it will make a huge difference, as we've seen with some of these other figures. You can do it a couple different ways. You can dab, or you can just get a nice little bit of paint on the paintbrush and just go over the edges like this. And you can see how they start to stand out. So just go through on the figure and make that happen. And that's what I'm going to do here. All these edges. And if you start out and your brush is too thick, then just pick a new brush. And I figured that brush, it just had too many bristles and it was spreading it too much. And so now I've got a thinner brush. I'm just hitting some of these individual layers here, and it works much better. So switch things up if it's not working the way that you think it should, and then just keep going. But this is where things really start to come together. It's where things really start to stand out. So don't skip this step, because it will make a massive difference. And you'll love it. You'll love the difference it makes. I know I do. When doing the head, you're going to need to be a little bit more careful. And not just because you don't want to get paint everywhere, but on the head, where it looks subtle on everything else, it stands out more. So you need to deaden it a little bit. So what I've been doing is just going over the edges and then rubbing my fingers over it to deaden it. And that seems to do the trick, where it's still there and you can still see it, but it's not so in your face. Hey, look, there's a highlight here, because you don't want that, especially in the face. Faces are subtle. Keep them subtle. Yeah, that's working pretty well. The key with the gauntlets and stuff, with some of these areas, is with the edges, you can just kind of hit them and then brush down, and it will leave the paint that you want. So remember, it's all these edges where you want the contrast, where you want things to stand out. Hopefully this is in focus. Sometimes it's hard for me to get things in focus. They look in focus, and then I edit them, and they're not in focus. So thank you for your patience with me. When it comes to metal, remember, this is an overall look, and so you need to pay attention to how everything's looking. You don't want any one area to stand out against another. You want everything to blend in, so that is just one piece of art, and not like, oh, look, the leg has, you know, a really good metallic look and nowhere else does. You want to pay attention to the overall. And so when you're hitting these areas, just be cognizant to kind of look over the entire figure. And then you'll be able to see, oh, I need to add a little bit more here, or I need to tone this down, or whatever. And that will work. So you can see in the legs, you know, we want everything to have a general look to it, and we're getting that. So just remember that. Pay attention to the overall feel and aesthetic of the figure. And you'll see flaws that nobody else will. And other people will see flaws that you never saw. So just be aware of that too. Nothing is ever quite perfect. And if it's perfect for you, it might not be perfect for somebody else. And that's okay. Because you're not making these for other people, you're making them for you. So let's move on to the skin. We're going to use some Stonewall Gray, just from my Vallejos. And we're going to do dry brush. So I'm going to get a little bit on here. I'm going to wipe it on our toilet paper here. And then we're just going to light over. Ooh, a little bit too much. Less is more. And we're just going to go over Darkseid. And just go nice and light. And if you need to wipe a little bit, then feel free to wipe a little bit. But you can see it makes a pretty stark difference right off the bat. And the less you have on the brush, the better off you're going to be. See, look at that. I'm still just using the dregs from that first little bit. And look at the difference. And then from there, you can just start moving all over. Start moving it around, and it doesn't take much. I mean, I'm still using some of that paint from that initial little wash. Oh, but look at that. That's a beautiful Darkseid. The great thing about this process is just watching the highlights come out, because you can see in the crags you're putting so little paint on that you're able to mute the stuff on the surface, and the stuff inside stays dark. And that's what adds all your contrast. And that's why only having a little bit of paint on is what you want, because you do not want it to fill in those little sections in there. You want it to look natural. He is looking pretty stellar at this point, but we're going to go through and we're going to do a little bit more. I'm just taking some silver, just some silver Vallejo, and I'm doing just a little bit of a dry wash over the armor with the silver, just to add a little bit more of a metallic sheen to everything. I mean, obviously we've already gone through with the blue and it's metallic, but if we go through with some silver, it's just going to highlight everything a little bit more. And I think that that's what he needs. So just dry brush with the silver really quickly, and it will do exactly what you want it to do. See, it lightens it up a little bit, gives it a little bit more of a metallic. Hits some of these edges. Digging it. While we're here, I'm just going to add some wash to his weapon here, and then add a little bit of silver. Just like I've done to his armor. You don't want his weapon to look crappy if he looks great. So take a minute, do the same things to this that you did to him. Last thing I want to do is I'm just going to go over lightly with the wash one more time. Just very, very little. And I'm just going to move it around. So I got very little on the brush. And that's going to just blend in things a little bit more. I'm going to get in some of these areas. I don't want it to go too dark, obviously, but this just is going to help me a little bit. Even put a little bit more on his face. Yeah, look at that. Don't be afraid to do this stuff. Experiment a little bit. Because you know that as you experiment, you have little things that you just weren't expecting to have happen. And they will go a long way toward just making it original and cool looking and exactly how you want it. Oh, I'm loving this guy. One last thing I've decided to do with this Darkseid is I'm going to take a toothpick with some glow-in-the-dark fabric paint, and we're going to get it on his eye. That, as you guys have seen before, adds just a cool little bit of extra texture to the figure. It catches the light in a different way, and of course it glows. It's just a little. And the great thing about this is that it's easily cleaned up. So you can go through, because I got a little bit up here on the eyelid, and you can just go like that really quick. Comes right off. And the eye is perfect. And from here on out, they will glow in the dark, and even when it's not dark, they will catch the light a little bit differently, and you'll be able to see the eyes better. Just a fun little trick.
And here we are. Very simple, but man, it makes a huge difference. I love how he turned out. And again, I was nervous about doing this guy because I love Darkseid so much, but I'm really happy with how he turned out. It looks like he's in metal. His skin has much more character and contrast to it. Absolutely beautiful. If you got this figure, do it. Doesn't take much. I think I used 2 to 3 different paints is all, and some wash. Don't be afraid to do it. And this guy's gonna pop on the shelf and absolutely make you proud. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe. If there's any figures you guys wanna see, let me know. And hopefully you're enjoying these and you're learning a little something, because man, I know I am. And the longer I do this, the more I learn. I look back to my old videos and I'm like, ugh, man, I screwed up. So have fun, enjoy, don't be too hard on yourself, make magic happen. Remember, check out StephenHuman.com. I am a novelist. You guys will love my books. If you love figures and you love superheroes, I'm right up your alley. Stephen Human. I'll see you guys next week.